Now, let's have it right, as Frank Warren likes to say. Dillian Whyte is the most deserving heavyweight in the division of a title shot, based off of the fighters he's fought over the last year and the performances he's put in and the fact that he's won all of those fights. Now, the problem with the heavyweight division is there's currently only two champions, which means there's a bit of a bottleneck in terms of trying to position yourself to get yourself into a mandatory position to face one of those two heavyweight champions. It's not like the super middleweight champion, where each of the champions is only holding one belt. If the dynamic was more like that, you could maneuver yourself around and get yourself into position to face one of those champions, but it's not the case in the heavyweight division. I think Deontay Wilder's only faced one mandatory challenger in the last 2 or 3 years or something like that. I may have made that up, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty certain I've heard that somewhere. Anyway, so Dillian Whyte's been making the headlines this week because he kind of was vocal about being unhappy with the offer he was made by Eddie Hearn or Joshua, whoever it is that puts that offer forward, to face Anthony Joshua in April at Wembley Stadium. He said that the offer itself was less than he made to fight Derek Chisora, which is a liberty. If that's true, then that's a liberty. That's taking a piss, quite frankly. Listening to Eddie Hearn earlier this week, he said that isn't the case. He would have made considerably more than he did against Chisora taking this fight. And he also said that he would be improving the offer this week. So Dillian Whyte's in a bit of a funny position, because along with his interview with TalkSport, where he mentioned about the fact that he was unhappy with the offer, rumours started to circulate about the fact that he might leave Eddie Hearn altogether and leave Matchroom as a promotional outfit and start elsewhere. So he's not only at a crossroads in terms of his next fight, what he's going to do for his next fight or who he's going to face, he's also at a crossroads in terms of the next few years of his career. Does he stay with Eddie Hearn, or does he move across to a different promoter? So let's discuss if he was to leave. So to me, there's only really two options for him if he was to leave Eddie Hearn. You can go to Al Heyman, PBC, or go to Frank Warren, Queensbury Promotions. So PBC is an interesting one because you may or may not know that they're trying to kind of infiltrate the UK market. Their first pay-per-view show in the UK is going to be De Gale vs Chris Eubank Jr. I think that's in late February in the O2 Arena, and that's going to be a pay-per-view fight. So if he was to sign to Al Heyman and join the PBC team, not only is there an opportunity for him to kind of spearhead that attack in the UK market and be a pay-per-view UK star for PBC and kind of be the main man for that promotional outfit in the UK is what I suppose I'm trying to say. But also that gets him his foot in the door stateside. When I say stateside, what I'm referring to is the heavyweights that PBC look after over there. I think they do Martin, who Joshua beat for his first heavyweight title, and I'm pretty sure they look after Dominic Brazil as well, and obviously they look after Deontay Wilder. So potentially that could get him into a position where he's fighting in the States against kind of relatively well-known heavyweights in the division. Another positive about going to PBC is everyone says that all PBC fighters get paid well. They're well looked after by Al Heyman. That's kind of why you saw when Eddie Hearn and DAZN started up in the States, you didn't get a lot of people from the PBC camp come over and sign for DAZN, even though he had this $1 billion burning a hole in his pocket. Um, so I suppose those are the positives. If he was to go to PBC, he could potentially be their main man in the UK. They're willing to invest in pay-per-view shows here in the UK, and he could spearhead that by fighting people like Brazil and Martin, etc., on pay-per-view shows here. The negative for the negative for me with that is, although ITV is known as, or ITV is probably the second biggest channel or broadcaster in the UK. I personally, I mean, I watch a lot of combat sports, MMA and boxing. I haven't seen them invest or kind of get the word out there a lot for the Gale and Chris Eubank fight just yet, and it's a few weeks away. They don't have the machine that um, Dillian Whyte kind of enjoys at the moment, being with Eddie Hearn and Sky Sports. That Sky Sports have a 24-hour news channel. They have 8, 9 channels or something like that, sports channels anyway. They're able to kind of pump out the promo and the marketing for these big pay-per-view fights. Also, as a consumer, it's just easier. Personally, when I order a pay-per-view fight on Sky Sports, I just press buttons on my remote. The first time I had to do it with BT Sport, I think I had to go on their website. Now I can do it via my remote. And honestly speaking, I've never done it with ITV. I think in terms of a casual audience, it's a lot easier for us to order pay-per-view events via Sky, because I'd say majority of us have Sky digital, what are they, Sky boxes rather than Virgin or BT. Maybe I'm just talking from my own personal standpoint, because all of my mates, most of them have Sky. Maybe there's certain areas up north where people shouldn't really live, that they all have Virgin and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm kind of going off topic. So I suppose that's what I'm trying to say about his options with PBC. There's fights out there for him to fight with PBC fighters. There's a platform in America for him. There's a platform in the UK for him, and PBC fighters get paid well. However, do you? I mean, him signing with PBC would get him a lot better chance to fight Wilder for the championship. But having said that, even if he was with PBC, I don't know how quickly that fight with Wilder would happen. I can't see him getting a fight with Wilder before Wilder fights Joshua, just because he's a dangerous opponent for Wilder, and I can't see Wilder taking another dangerous fight. Bearing in mind, when Wilder fought Fury, he fought him because he thought he was out of shape, he was getting him at the right time, and he would knock him out. It won't be that simple with Dillian Whyte. So I can't see Wilder having a voluntary defense against Dillian Whyte with all the risk attached to it before Wilder steps in the ring with Anthony Joshua. Another option for Dillian Whyte is Frank Warren and the BT platform. Now, I must say, I'm really impressed with how BT market their fights. Their social media work is the best. They're way better than Sky Sports, in my opinion. Their YouTube content, what they do on Twitter, just generally their promos, even their adverts on TV, I personally think are better than Sky. So it's a new kind of outlet in terms of pay-per-view in the UK. I think their first ever UK pay-per-view was Canelo v Triple G2. I think, I haven't checked that, but yeah, their first ever UK pay-per-view wasn't so long ago. It was literally within the last year and a half, something like that. So it's a new platform. It needs to grow, but for it to grow, it needs stars. And I think Dillian Whyte has established himself as a pay-per-view fighter here in the UK. So if he was to move across to Frank Warren, although their platform isn't as mature as the pay-per-view platform isn't as mature as Sky's, I think it's a lot further along than ITV's is, and I think he'd be able to um, he'd be able to get a lot more pay-per-view buys fighting on BT as opposed to ITV. I still think Sky is the number one platform, and I still think if he was to fight the same opponent, and the fight was to be held on each of the three platforms, you'd get the most buys on the Sky platform, just because people are used to using that platform and doing it that way, if that makes sense. But anyway, so Frank Warren. So the positives with Frank Warren is the BT are improving, and they're new in the although they're new in the game, they're improving. But personally, I can't see him signing with Frank Warren happening. So Frank Warren was really vocal about Dillian Whyte fighting Chisora and how it wasn't a pay-per-view fight. Now I know that had a lot to do with the fact that that show clashed with his show, Frampton and Warrington. Um, but he said it. He said that's not a pay-per-view fight. It shouldn't be on pay-per-view. So would Frank Warren be comfortable putting Dillian Whyte in a fight that isn't a title fight, and saying and trying to make that a pay-per-view fight? He probably would be comfortable doing it, but I don't think he could at this stage, just because of what he said previously. And also with Frank Warren, I'd say the only kind of real kind of fight that would be easier to make would be a fight against Tyson Fury. But Tyson Fury hasn't got any belts. So it would be a big fight here in the UK. It would do a lot of numbers. It'd make him money, but it wouldn't get him a championship belt if that's what his overall goal is. If his goal is just to make money, then yeah, by all means, that would make sense. But at the same time, after the Fury fight, what would he do? Where to go next? Obviously, you don't have to just fight fighters that are in the same promotional camp and outfit as you. But I don't know whether Frank Warren has the pull to get him fights against people, or competitors at the top of the heavyweight division, just because Dillian Whyte's a very kind of dangerous opponent for any of the champions, and I can't see, or not necessarily champions, anyone at the top of the division, and I can't see anyone kind of voluntarily fighting him, just to prove who's a better fighter, similar to the situation that happened with Dillian Whyte when he fought Joseph Parker. So Warren, I'd rather, if I was Dillian Whyte, and obviously I don't know him personally, I don't know what his finances are like, I don't know what his situation is like, but if personally, if I had a choice, I'd sign for PBC before I sign for Frank Warren. And obviously there's a third option, which is stay with Eddie Hearn. Now, if Dillian Whyte was to stay with Eddie Hearn, what could we expect next for him? So immediately we've got the option of fighting Anthony Joshua. I know Dillian Whyte has been vocal about the fact that, saying that he wasn't happy with the offer made, and whether this new improved offer that Eddie Hearn's going to put to him this week convinces him to fight Joshua, that remains to be seen. But if we just remove Joshua away from the equation, Dillian Whyte he's headlined 2 pay-per-views now under Eddie Hearn, and he's now in a position where he can call himself a pay-per-view fighter. I think personally, if I was Dillian Whyte, this is what I would personally do. Irrespective of how much money you think you should be paid to fight Anthony Joshua, an offer's going to come Dillian Whyte's way where he stands to make millions of pounds to fight Joshua in April. It's highly unlikely that Joshua's going to fight Fury or Wilder, and I think it would be Sky Sports' preference for Joshua to fight in the UK, which then basically just leaves one person, and that's Dillian Whyte to fight Joshua. And if I was offered several £1 million, I think the best thing he can do is take that fight, irrespective of if he thinks he's being underpaid. And this is my reason. It's not because, oh, let's dare to be great. If I really want to be champion, the money shouldn't be an object. No, the reason why I'm saying this is simply because it's another pay-per-view show. That'll be his third pay-per-view in a row. Um, Getting beat by Joshua, if he was to get beat, I'm not saying that he's definitely going to get beat. I know Joshua would be the favourite, but I'm not saying Whyte doesn't stand a chance in the fight. So obviously, so Whyte does stand a chance in the fight. He could potentially win that fight and become the holder of 4 belts if you listen to Eddie Hearn, because I don't count the IBO. Anyway, so he could potentially become world champion, and he could potentially become the A side in the rematch against Joshua. That's obviously a best case scenario. Worst case scenario, he loses the fight. But what are the positives from losing that fight? Well, firstly, that will be his third pay-per-view show in a row. Obviously, there'd be an element of a comeback, which means he'd have to fight oppositions that aren't as highly ranked as he's been fighting recently, Joseph Parker, etc. You'd have to fight more top 15 rather than top 10, top 5 fighters, which wouldn't be pay-per-view shows. But he'd get paid handsomely for those. Whether, he may be top supporting bill on a top supporting fight on a pay-per-view fight after that, etc., or he'd headline a Sky Sports show. He'd get paid well for that. But I personally, I don't put as much value in a loss as a lot of people do in boxing. If you look at Luis Ortiz, he lost to Deontay Wilder. I think, when was that? That was last year or something like that. Let me check. Let me see when Luis Ortiz lost to Deontay Wilder. So we've got, I'm just looking at his Wikipedia. So that was in March 2018. He lost to Wilder, and he's fought 2 people that I've never heard of since. But people keep mentioning his name in the title picture. His name's come up a couple of times about fighting Joshua. Wilder seems to think he's the best heavyweight in the world, which obviously he's just saying that because he beat him. But if Luis Ortiz is still in the title picture, why shouldn't Dillian Whyte be in the title picture if he loses to AJ? Does that make sense? So a loss isn't the end of the world. Dillian Whyte himself is quite I know he's had 20 odd fights. He's had like 25, 26 fights. And let me go on his page now. Let me check. Yeah, he's had 26 fights. But he started his professional career really only started in 2014, I'd say, because he had a couple of fights and he had a bit of a layoff. So he hasn't been around for that long, and he hasn't taken that much damage. He's only ever been knocked out once. He's been hurt a couple of times against Chisora the first fight, and Joseph Parker at round 12 of the Joseph Parker fight. But he's still got a few years in him. So even if he was to lose against Anthony Joshua, he's got time to rebuild. He's got that massive payday if he fights him in April in the bank, and he's already had the 2 pay-per-view fights. So touchwood, financially he'd be set. But then it would just be about getting that world title belt. And I think staying with Matchroom, taking that fight with AJ, gives him the best opportunity to do that, because if he was to lose, and this is worst case scenario, if he was to lose, he'd have the opportunity to rebuild. He'd have a platform that the consumers are used to him being on. We'd all get on board his comeback story. He'd have a couple of fights and get himself back in a position where the complexion of the heavyweight division may be totally different. We may be in a position where we've got 3 heavyweight champions, or someone had to drop one of their belts because someone, say for example Joshua's got 3 belts and he can't do a mandatory defense, so he has to vacate one of his belts, and that leaves it open for two challengers to fight for a vacant title, if that makes sense. And obviously there's so many if, buts and maybes with what I've just said there, but with what we have in front of us, if I was Dillian Whyte, I'd stay with Matchroom. I'd fight Joshua in April. If I win, you can't get better than that. But if I lose, I know there's a way for me to come back, and I know there's a road for me to rebuild upon, and there's a path to come back and actually win that world title, along with getting paid well along the way. because at the end of the day, as a boxer, that's your main goal, isn't it? Anyway, I hope I haven't gone on too much. 20 minutes that was. I didn't realise I'd be that long. But anyway, comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you next time.